asking the question, who's going to be the party crasher? That's one question that we're asking, but did they get it right? What are your thoughts there? Several people saying that they believe that it's going to be Oklahoma State. So let's look at that real quick, James. Let's just kind of talk about the Oklahoma State. Can Oklahoma State get there? Oklahoma State this week, they have Oklahoma. So they have to beat Oklahoma. Then they got Iowa State. They have to beat Iowa State, Kansas State, and Kansas. Okay, so they have a top 5 game this week. And if Iowa State manages to win this week against West Virginia, you would assume that Iowa State, with the win over West Virginia, think about if you look at this, a win over West Virginia, a win over Oklahoma, and a win over TCU. How do you not get them up into the top 10 pretty quick? I mean, I know they've lost 2 games, but is that enough to get Oklahoma there? Because they're not going to get a lot of credit for Kansas State, and they're not going to get a lot of credit for beating Kansas. But what nobody's talking about is the way the Big Ten does it. They don't have divisions. They just take the top teams, okay? So Iowa State's remaining schedule is West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Kansas State. Iowa State may lose to Oklahoma State, but I'll be surprised if they don't run the table. And if they do, if they lose to Oklahoma State and Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma this weekend, guess who? It'll be Iowa State and Oklahoma State in the championship game. Because right now, Iowa State's in first place. And they have a win. So I don't know if Oklahoma State's going to get there. I don't think they're the party crashers. Let me say this. I don't know if anybody's going to crash the party, James. But I'm going to tell you, a team that can lock a spot in, and they're already warning me on Facebook that I better not say this, but it's the Auburn Tigers. And that is a – now, do I think it's realistic? No. But if you're building a resume for getting to the championship game, they will have 3. If they make it, that would be 3 wins against a top 10 program. Because Georgia, what's going to happen? If Auburn beats Georgia, Georgia's going to fall out of the top 4, but they won't fall out of the top 10 because they're still going to be the winner of the East. Then Auburn comes back and beats Alabama, who would probably be the number 1 team at that time. So technically, they would have beat number 1 twice. Georgia goes on to win, makes it to the SEC championship game, and Auburn beats them again. That would be 3 wins, 2 against number 1 or 2, and 1 against another top 5, 6 program. Now, do I think that's a possibility? Absolutely not. But you cannot say, do you think that they would keep a two-loss SEC team out, champion out, who beat the number 1 and 2 team in the country? Or the number 1 team twice, actually, probably what would happen. Because Georgia, if Georgia wins this week, when they showed it with their showdown against Auburn, do you think they could keep a 10-2 Auburn out if that's the way they finish?
They'd have a hard time doing so. I couldn't see why in that scenario.
D.H. Bates says if Bama wins out, how can Auburn be there? Bama won't be there if they lose to Auburn in the Iron Bowl. See, everybody forgets Auburn has 2 losses, but one of them's to Clemson. So if Auburn wins out, Auburn is the SEC champion.
Now this is assuming that Alabama beats LSU.
Right. What I'm saying is, if both teams win out and they're both going into, if Alabama wins out and Auburn wins and beats Georgia and they're sitting in that Iron Bowl, Alabama's not in if they lose to Auburn. So Auburn controls their destiny regardless of what. Here's the thing. In the West, Auburn controls their destiny. Auburn controls their destiny. LSU lost to who?
Mississippi State.
Mississippi State. And do they only have one loss in the West?
Yes.
So LSU, Alabama has to – wouldn't that be something? Alabama helps LSU out. But if LSU were to beat Alabama, which I don't think that's going to happen, but if it did, then Auburn would need someone else to beat LSU. God, that's hard to believe that LSU, as bad as they played, have only had one SEC West loss, and that was Mississippi State. But I think LSU's not making it into the playoffs regardless. But Auburn, JPC said that if it's 2 losses, then the SEC may be left out. If it's Auburn, possibly. Tell them about it, JoJo. I'm getting drilled on Facebook. They tell me you need to stop the Auburn talk. I just said who could be a party crasher. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm just showing you that is a possibility. And it's as realistic as Oklahoma State making it. It's as real as TCU making it. You know, these teams all need help. Nick Saban said it doesn't matter, but there's quite a few teams that's going to need some help. So let's look at a couple other quick things here, James. As we get ready to go to break, we'll come back and talk about what they got right. I don't think – so everybody listening, I do not think Auburn gets there. But if Alabama wins out and Georgia wins out, and then – Alabama wins until the Auburn Iron Bowl, I'm telling you, and Auburn upsets Georgia while they're number 1, then beats Alabama while they're number 1, then goes on and beats Georgia again in the SEC championship game, the committee's going to have a hard time finding 3 better wins than that. And they've said, James, right or wrong, did they not say with what they did last night that head-to-head and strength of schedule matters? Why do I know they say strength of schedule matters? Wisconsin and Miami sitting at 9 and 10, 2 Power 5 teams that are undefeated, not even in the top 8 in the country, and they have perfect records. So they're saying strength of schedule matters. And if Auburn pulled that off, which they're not, I think they would be in. Let's hope we don't have to figure that out, okay? Let's just hope that that's not even close. What's the storyline that you think this committee is trying to set up? Are they trying to set up a couple storylines with the rankings that they have? I'll give you my thoughts on that, as well as which fan bases got hosed and which ones are ecstatic on today. We're talking college football playoffs. Who got hosed, who didn't, what they got right, what they got wrong. Are there storylines? They're trying to build storylines. JPC and others on Facebook Live having a conversation about if Auburn wins out and Georgia only has 1 loss and Georgia beats Auburn in the playoff in the SEC, then they would get in. But if Auburn wins out and beats Georgia twice, JPC, there's no way Georgia's getting in because Georgia would have 2 losses at that point into the same team. So I think that's the difference between Ohio State and Penn State last year. The Ohio State Buckeyes sitting at number 6 was probably my shocker of the night, James. I really thought that Ohio State, and it showed that the committee is not going off of the AP poll, the coaches poll, or anything, that those 13 members looked at it and made their own assessment and gave credit for head-to-head. But do you think they know that Oklahoma has done this since that game and their defense is awful and they have several more games that they're probably not going to win, okay? I don't think they're favored this week in their matchup with Oklahoma State. So sometimes I think the committee goes ahead and puts team in there, James, so they can limit the arguments knowing that it's going to work itself out. Because the reality of it is Oklahoma probably will not win out, okay? I doubt it very seriously. If Ohio State wins out, they're going to be the Big Ten champions. And the question then becomes, will they leave a Big Ten champion out if the other 4 teams stay in there? Because right now, with the way it's set, they have set it up where it's very possible that these 4 teams could all make it in. Now, why would they do that, James? Let me give you a few storylines, James. Teacher and student, Georgia, Alabama. They've built that up to keep people engaged till win. If they get what they want, regardless of whether both of those teams make it in or only one, people are going to stay tuned in to college football playoff rankings until the last game, because the SEC championship game will be the last game on Saturday, most likely. The last game of the season before the final poll. And you got 1 and 2. So that's going to make they're going to sell so much advertising that week. If both of these teams went out the rest of the year, go into that at 1 and 2, I don't care which one's 1, which one's 2. They will make a killing. That's one setup, student and teacher. Another setup potentially is a rematch between who? Alabama and Clemson, three-peat. And people say, nobody wants to see that. I promise you, people want to see Nick Saban lose back-to-back games and be dethroned as the king of college football by Dabo Swinney. They want to see that. But another storyline that no one's talking about, Alabama and Notre Dame, 2 storied programs. If these 2 teams went out, you got a storied rivalry matchup. But guess what else you also got built in there? Georgia and Notre Dame rematch. So they built a lot of I mean, it's hard to believe that in 4 teams you can have that much. Now, do they have all that when that conversation? Not out loud, but yes, that's part of it. And then you look at the teams who feel like they may have got hosed, James. How would you feel if you were a Wisconsin fan or a Miami fan right now?
Probably not too great since they haven't lost a game yet, but are still very much on the outside looking in.
They are, but are they really? Because when you look at it, look what they did. They put them at 9 and 10. Who would Wisconsin end up beating to finally get there? If Ohio State can get there, so can Wisconsin. Because if there's a scenario where you put Ohio State in, there's not any of those teams in front of that. You don't put Oklahoma in over the Big Ten champion, I don't think, if they didn't beat them head-to-head. I don't think you put Penn State in. You don't put TCU in. So there's Wisconsin if they run the table and beat Ohio State in the championship game.
Now, I think Miami has a lot easier path, though, as far as getting to the top 5, because they have Virginia Tech and Notre Dame back-to-back at home, and they only have to go on the road one more time before the end of the regular season. And let's just say they do win all the rest of their regular season games.
And then they would play Clemson.
That's right.
So Miami, listen to this. Miami is the oil in what they call the oil in the anointment.
To me, that's my wild card out of any of these college football playoff teams in the rankings.
Miami could single-handedly upset the entire college football playoffs. They could beat Notre Dame. They could ultimately beat Clemson, and they would if they went out, they're in. I don't care if they beat Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, and Clemson, they're in. I mean, there's zero way you don't put them in if they beat the number 3, number 4 team. Plus, I think Virginia Tech is number 13 right now. So they would end the season in 1 month. They would have 3 top 25 team wins. So those 2 teams, I think they're upset right now, James, because they have a much higher road to go. But if those 2 teams went out, if they end up undefeated in a big, here's the key, big Power 5 conference with a championship game, I don't see how you keep them out, man. I just, even though those teams in front of them, I don't see how you keep them out. And I think the committee, once again, James, they know that. So they appease all these other teams. They appease Penn State by not dropping them too far. They appease Oklahoma by putting them in front of Ohio State because they could justify it. But they got Ohio State in front of Penn State. They got TCU, who just lost once, to a surging Iowa State team. The Iowa State team helps bolster Oklahoma. And the committee talked about that. Kirby Hocutt said, this Iowa State team that lost 2 games, it's not the same team. Since they put their backup quarterback in, they're undefeated. And I don't know if they don't run the table. If I was an SEC AD that had a job opening, I've been to Ames, Iowa. Isn't that where they're at? Isn't that where Iowa State? I have been out there. I don't know if you can fly in. You may have to helicopter in. I don't know how big it is. But I would have been – my agent or somebody from my university would be talking to Matt Campbell. That guy can flat – he was good at Toledo, and he's been good at Iowa State, and I'd be snatching him up. Because not just because of what he's doing on the field, James. You talk about recruiting. You know, they say Tennessee, you can't recruit at Tennessee. You bring Matt Campbell in. The guy, he's from Toledo. That's where he coached at. So he has the Ohio connection. Then he's been out where? He's been out in Midwest. He's recruited Texas and in the surrounding areas there. So he has Big Ten country. He has Big 12 country, and he'd be in the SEC. I mean, he'd be one of the top candidates on my list. And he's not a Johnny-come-lately like some of these guys that coach 1 year and has a winning record. And everybody go, woo! This guy's coached a couple years and proven that he's been a winner at more than one place. So, anyway, back to the college football playoffs. Which fan base is the happiest today? Is it Oklahoma? Is Oklahoma right now the happiest fan base, or Georgia? Is Oklahoma at number 1 happier because they thought they were going to be out of it with that bad loss they thought to Iowa State? Or is Georgia happier being number 1?
That's a good question. Georgia, obviously, for that number 1 spot, but happiest, so I think has to go to Oklahoma, just as far as losing at home to Iowa State, and then now being on the right outside the top 4. I mean, they're in pretty good position if they take care of business, which, as we have seen over the last few years for the teams that have made those initial, the top 4 in the initial rankings from the selection committee, hasn't exactly been a guarantee.
Yeah, and when you look at it, if you're sitting there at Georgia, no number 1 team is won, okay? No number 1 team is won. Alabama upset the 14-0 Clemson. The Clemson upset the 14-0 Alabama. So no number 1 team is won. To me, you have to go with Oklahoma because Georgia was going to be in either way. They were going to be 1 or 2, and their hopes of getting in was all on their shoulders. If they put Oklahoma lower behind Ohio State, this is where when Saban says it doesn't matter, James, this is where it matters. If Ohio State was in front of Oklahoma and Ohio State wins out, what could Oklahoma have done to leapfrog them? You already said the head-to-head didn't matter, and it would have been a really, really tough road, and that's why it matters at this point. But ultimately, I think any of the top 10 teams that went out has a legitimate chance if Miami pulls their part or the top 4 doesn't hold up. But if the top 4 wins out, if the top 4 wins out and there's only 1 loss out of the top 4 for the rest of the year, and that is Alabama and Georgia, at the most, 1 team outside of the top 4 makes it in, and maybe none. If they went out and it's a close SEC championship game, because the committee said head-to-head matters, so it's going to be awful hard for them to put Notre Dame in front of a Georgia with 1 loss if that 1 loss is to the number 1 Crimson Tide in the championship game in a close game. And Robert Saucier, I'm going to break after this statement. This is thin air for Georgia and Kirby. It's a whole new world to be number one. It's easy to hunt. It's very difficult to be the hunted. And these players, and Notre Dame is in the same boat. Their coach was on the show last night talking about being ranked. When Nick Saban's saying it doesn't matter. It's different when you're hunting versus being the hunted. Can Georgia, can Notre Dame handle it? Clemson and Alabama have proven that they can handle it, but can the new guys to the party, Georgia and Notre Dame, handle it? We're going to find that out over the next few weeks